The December 14th, 2012 meeting of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents will please come to order. And I believe Regent Broad is joining us on the phone. Regent Broad?
I can hear you. Good morning.
All right. Good morning. Great.
Good morning.
Well, we're glad you're joining us. And we're going to begin this meeting with several really important recognitions. So President Kaler, please join me at the podium.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. It's my great pleasure to be part of an activity to honor Robert Jones. So, Senior Vice President Jones, would you please join me at the podium? As most of you know, Robert is leaving us to become the president of the State University of New York at Albany. The list of his more than 3 decades of accomplishment at our university is long. He's been a researcher, a teacher, a leader of system-wide thinking, of equity and diversity concerns, and of our global footprint. He has been a wise and historic contributor to the university we know today. Robert, we thank you for all you have done for our system, for our campuses, and our communities, and we wish you and Lynn great success in Albany. Madam Chair?
Thanks, President Kaler. And now it is my great pleasure to read the Certificate of Appreciation for Robert Jones. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with sincere gratitude and appreciation the exceptional dedication, service, and contributions of Robert J. Jones, Senior Vice President for Academic Administration, U of M System. An accomplished scholar and administrator, Robert has held University of Minnesota leadership positions since 1986, assuming the Senior Vice President role in 2004. An expert researcher, teacher, and advocate of community outreach, Robert advanced an inclusive vision of academic excellence for the public good and fostered an environment of partnerships and cohesiveness across the university system. A staunch advocate of a vitally engaged university, Robert oversaw the strategic growth of the university's campuses at Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester, strengthening the university as a well-integrated multi-campus system. He also led development of the university's collaborative urban research and outreach engagement center in North Minneapolis. Robert has championed faculty and student development along with access, equity, and diversity as core values of the university. His accomplishments include academic promotion and tenure review and support, multicultural and student development programs, initiatives supporting faculty development and mentoring, research productivity, and technology-based teaching, the $17 million restoration of Kauffman Memorial Union, programs to support and retain faculty of color, and a community-wide initiative to close Minnesota's achievement gap. Robert's work has touched communities far and wide. On behalf of the university community, the Regents extend their respect and deepest gratitude to Robert Jones for his outstanding service to the University of Minnesota. We wish him personal and professional fulfillment in his future endeavors. Congratulations, Robert.
Thank you.
I'm going to say one more. After all that I read, I'm not sure how Robert has the energy to become a president of a university, but we certainly wish him well in that endeavor. Robert, would you like to say a few words?
Chair Cohen, President Kaler, friends and colleagues from around this great university, I think as all of you know, I came here 34 and a half years ago, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed assistant professor. Was going to change the world by doing research to stabilize grain yield of our important agronomic crops. And had a very good fortune, I think, and I think it's important to say, I think much of the success that I've been able to achieve at this great university is because of the start that I had in my Department of Agronomy and Plant Genetics, where I had the opportunity to be successful because I had colleagues that cared about me, cared about the work that I was doing. And much to many of their chagrin, I crossed over to the dark side shortly after becoming a full professor. But I have to say, I found the same kind of support and gratification in doing the administrative work that I found in doing my laboratory research work. And a lot of folks find that very odd. But it's all about the opportunity to do things that are innovative and to make a difference. And so I'd just like to thank this great university. I've served under at least 6 presidents, I think, in the last 34 and a half years. And it's been gratifying to me to be able to learn, to lead, and to serve this great university for 34 and a half years. And I'll always be a Gopher, so don't forget that.
It's now my pleasure to honor Tim Mulcahy. Vice President Mulcahy, will you please join me at the podium? Tim is retiring after transforming our Office for Research, upgrading to national recognition our Office for Technology Commercialization, and forever altering this university's relationship between our research enterprise and the business community. He's moving on to 3 more important endeavors for him. Believe it or not, more important endeavors. Photography, fishing, and excessive grandfathering. 3 activities I think he will excel at, and I notice they're not necessarily in the order you'll do them. Tim, we thank you for all you've done for the University of Minnesota, and we wish you and Patty great happiness in your retirement. Madam Chair.
Thanks, President Kaler. And now, again, it is my great pleasure to read the Certificate of Appreciation, and this time for R. Timothy Mulcahy. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with sincere gratitude and appreciation the exceptional dedication, service, and contributions of R. Timothy Mulcahy, Vice President for Research. An accomplished researcher and administrator, Tim became Vice President for Research in 2005. He moved swiftly to initiate a series of organizational changes and programs designed to revitalize commercialization of university-based technologies and to enrich university business relations. The launch of Minnesota Innovation Partnerships, a unique approach to industry-funded research, and the first of its kind in the nation, made it easier for business partners to sponsor research at the university. Tim also established the Office of Business Relations to serve as the industry's initial point of contact with the university. Tim believes that productive relationships are the foundation of success, and through his commitment and expertise effectively built relationships both inside and outside the university. He has been an ardent advocate for the university research community and was instrumental in overseeing the reinvestment of technology transfer royalty revenue into research and scholarly initiatives, including graduate student fellowships, major research equipment purchases, facility improvements, and support for the arts and humanities. He served on the board of directors of the Bio-Business Alliance of Minnesota, was a member of the legislatively appointed Minnesota Science and Technology Authority Advisory Committee, and served as president of the University Industry Demonstration Partnership, a national consortium hosted by the National Academies of Sciences to enhance the value of collaborative partnerships between universities and industry in the United States. On behalf of the university community, the Regents extend their respect and deepest gratitude to R. Timothy Mulcahy for his outstanding service to the University of Minnesota. We wish him well in those future endeavors that President Kaler enumerated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I don't know who that Tim Mulcahy was, but I will be happy to accept that nice recognition on his behalf. It's been a tremendous journey for me here at the University of Minnesota, and all of you have been a huge part of that. I think the key to success is team, and there is a lot of team. There's a lot of game here at Minnesota, and I think, you know, I'm happy to be leaving at a point where I believe the university is in great hands. The future is incredibly bright, and I'm just proud of the small role I played in helping get there over the last 8 years. Many of the groups in the room I've had the opportunity to thank for their support previously, so I will thank you in mass today. But I want to thank two groups in particular, and one is the faculty. They have supported me, you wouldn't believe, and the other is the Regents. We couldn't have done any of these groundbreaking, innovative things, and we've done a few, if it weren't for the support of this Board of Regents. And they've held us accountable when we needed to be accountable, but they gave us the courage and the encouragement to try to do something different in the interest of this institution. So to all of you and your predecessors that I've had the honor of working with, I want to thank you very much. This is a great honor for me and a sad moment. It's always the photographer. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, I'll take that. That's a guarantee. All right. There you go. Thank you. Congratulations.
And now it's my pleasure to honor Steve Goldstein, President and CEO of the University of Minnesota Foundation. Steve, if you'd please join me. Steve has been an exceptional leader of the foundation, and he has been invaluable to my wife Karen and me as we have been reintroduced to the university's community of donors and community leaders. Under Steve's leadership, the foundation and the entire university development community are well positioned to build on his legacy to support our students, our faculty, and our research, and importantly, to sustain the excellence of this great university. Steve, thank you so much for all you have done for the university. We wish you and Mary all the best in the days ahead. Congratulations. Chair Cohen.
It is again, indeed, my great pleasure and privilege to read this certificate of appreciation for L. Stephen Goldstein. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with sincere gratitude and appreciation the exceptional dedication, service, and contributions of L. Stephen Goldstein, President and Chief Executive Officer of the University of Minnesota Foundation. A strategic, innovative leader and passionate advocate for the University of Minnesota, Steve was named President and Chief Executive Officer of the University of Minnesota Foundation in 2008. Prior to that appointment, Steve served as the Foundation's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. Steve also was National President of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association and served multiple terms as a University of Minnesota Foundation trustee. Steve believes that the University of Minnesota has the power to transform lives. Through his creativity and commitment, he has inspired others to set aggressive goals and find new ways to reach them. During his tenure with the Alumni Association, Steve created new revenue through intellectual property commercialization and real estate development. He also successfully led the foundation to new levels of growth and effectiveness in a particularly challenging economic environment, reaching $194 million in fiscal year 2012, tying its all-time record for annual gift production. That same fiscal year, the foundations together distributed a record $169 million in private dollars. Steve led the way to reaching these milestones by building strong partnerships across the university system, exhibiting commitment to operational excellence, and by maintaining a strong and sustainable financial model. With his wife, Mary, Steve also established an endowed scholarship to provide financial assistance to future generations of students following in their footsteps on campus. The university and Minnesota have benefited greatly from Steve's exceptional leadership. On behalf of the university community, the Regents extend their respect and deepest gratitude to L. Stephen Goldstein for his outstanding service to the University of Minnesota. We wish him personal fulfillment in his future endeavors.
You know, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have served my beloved alma mater in this capacity. Last night, we convened, it was the final quarterly meeting of the deans and the chancellors. And at that meeting, I shared with them that UMF, along with my colleague, partner Becky Mulkerson and the Minnesota Medical Foundation, combined raised a total from fiscal 6 to fiscal 12 of $2.4 billion in total private support. And I congratulated the deans and the chancellors in this outstanding effort in the face of really lousy economic environment, almost catastrophic economic environment. And I just wanted to share with everyone what a great honor it has been to be part of that really remarkable achievement. It has been fun and it has been an honor, and I thank you very much for that.
It was indeed my pleasure to congratulate and award certificates of appreciation to these three remarkable men who have had such an impact on our university. So let's give them one more round of applause. As President Kaler keeps reminding me, change is good, but sometimes it's harder to believe that than others. Anyway, we will build on the strong foundation that these three men have left for us at this university. Now, I'd like a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And now I look forward to the report of President Kaler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 months have passed since we last met as a board, and much has happened. Just yesterday, I offered to our faculty, staff, and Student Affairs Committee the appointments of Dr. Brian Herman as our new Vice President for Research and Dr. Catrice Albert as our new Vice President for Equity and Diversity. And of course, we have just said farewell to Vice Presidents Jones and Mulcahy and Foundation CEO Goldstein. I do think change is a good thing, but just to recap, in the past 17 months, we have put into place a new provost, a new Crookston chancellor, new vice presidents for university services, for research, for information technology, and for equity and diversity, a new system-wide chief communications officer, and a new government relations special assistant, deans of the Carlson School, Humphrey School, and Dental School, a new athletics director, and even a new board secretary. So new leaders come in and question what's being done and why. It brings fresh eyes and new ideas and different ways to do things. It does indeed keep an organization dynamic. On the other hand, as we move through these transitions, we lose years of experience and knowledge. And this is one area in which the guidance of this board is so important to me. You as a group have been very helpful in sharing your institutional memory and the organizational history with me over the past year and a half. I've appreciated your input, your opinions, and your guidance, and I thank you as a group for your leadership during this very large but exciting transition. As you know, at the end of this month, when Senior Vice President Jones departs to become the President of the State University of New York in Albany, we will make some changes in response to a task force I appointed to look into the future of the Office for Academic Administration. The recommendations of that task force are strong, and as a result, I've decided to eliminate the office and realign the functions and reporting lines with the administrative unit or college that most closely shares their mission and work. Reporting lines will transition on January 1, and I've asked Vice President Fitzenreiter to work with each unit to transition appropriate resources by the end of the fiscal year. This is an important change, but I stress that we could not have achieved this change without the extraordinary and firm foundation of system organization that Robert and the chancellors have built. These changes, I believe, will not only improve organizational effectiveness, but will also achieve considerable cost savings. More change awaits us. The boards of both the University of Minnesota Foundation and the Minnesota Medical Foundation have proposed a merger. They're now conducting their due diligence, and if that process is completed successfully, we anticipate actions by both boards to finalize the merger by late next month. When Steve Goldstein retires at the end of January, and if the merger is consummated, MMF CEO Becky Malkerson will assume the role of interim CEO of the combined organization, while a national search commences for a new CEO. I am extremely grateful, and that is an understatement, to Becky and Steve for their outstanding work over their years and their extraordinary cooperation in effecting this potential merger. In other news, since we last met, we publicly launched Generation Next, which I have agreed to co-chair along with Kim Nelson of General Mills. This is a broad partnership of organizations and leaders from across the Twin Cities, the first of its kind in our area, but modeled after successful programs in Cincinnati and Boston and elsewhere to help narrow the achievement gap. This is an issue I feel passionately about, and that has long-term implications for the demographics and diversity of this university, and indeed for the state's future prosperity. I especially hope to activate our university's research resources and expertise in a coordinated way to help tackle this important problem. Also, since we last met, you may have read that the Big Ten has expanded to 14 members with the addition of Rutgers and Maryland. We're still not very good at math, but the Big Ten is a good mark. In addition to joining us in the athletic conference, they are also joining its academic counterpart, the prestigious Committee on Institutional Cooperation, or the CIC. Rutgers and Maryland are both flagship land-grant universities and, like us, are members of the Association of American Universities, the nation's top research institutions. The expansion is a smart, strategic decision with long-range implications for the future of the Big Ten. It positions the Big Ten very well in what is, for better or worse, an ever-changing, highly competitive sports entertainment landscape. It extends the conference national footprint and, frankly, our national exposure as an institution, enabling us to recruit top students and top student athletes to the university. Certainly there are some challenges, such as the time commitments of our student athletes and travel schedules. Our number one priority as we move forward is to ensure the welfare of our student athletes who, on all of our campuses, are also winning in the classroom. Some statistics from this year: 70 Gopher athletes from fall sports were honored as academic all Big Ten selections. At Crookston, 17 of our Golden Eagle athletes were named to the Northern Sun Intercollegiate Conference All-Academic Team, and at UMD this fall, 55 student athletes made the Northern Sun All-Academic list. And football player Brendan Foss of Minnesota Morris was named a Division III Academic All-American. On other fronts, one of the real joys of this job is the chance to meet interesting people. And earlier this fall, I had the chance to visit with a University of Minnesota Duluth grad from the class of 1977. His name is Brian Kabilka, and he happened to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry this year. We are very proud of him and of UMD, and I can report that while he is now a world-renowned scientist, he is at heart a baker's son from Little Falls, Minnesota. Last December, 1 year ago at the board meeting, you approved an innovative research and intellectual property policy called Minnesota Innovation Partnerships, or MIN-IP. Since then, the program has been recognized by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the White House for its groundbreaking approach. And I'm happy to report that to date, we have signed 40 MIN-IP agreements with 35 different companies. That is remarkable in just 1 year. It's a tribute to our Office for Technology Commercialization, and it shows that industry is eager to work with us when we are innovative and entrepreneurial. Despite that progress on MIN-IP and our record number of startup companies this year, we're not yet fully recognized for all we do with the state's business community, and it remains incumbent on all of us to spread the word when we can about the university's entrepreneurial partnerships and how we help drive the state's prosperity and job creation. Now, a quick look ahead. Legislative session begins on January 8th. Already, we have been meeting with new legislative leaders. Jason Roloff, our Government Relations Special Assistant, and his staff are working hard with new legislative members, and we're aggressively seeking support from all of our key allies. Just Wednesday, we met with the governor in a positive meeting, and we look forward to working with him and his staff as the session unfolds. And I invite you to attend our annual legislative briefing sponsored by the Alumni Association on Wednesday, January 23rd at 6 p.m. As Regents, you are some of our most important advocates, and we will need all of your voices as the session unfolds. Of course, the Gophers football team is headed to the Menike Car Care Bowl of Texas on December 28th, and I hope many of you will join Karen and me in Houston. And finally, a truly unexpected honor and distinction awaits me this weekend. Tomorrow night, I will be the Grand Marshal of the Holly Dazzle Parade in downtown Minneapolis. And I will be accompanied by none other than a major Twin Cities campus celebrity and my close personal friend, Goldie. Now, leading a parade seems like an appropriate and wonderful way to cap a very good year for this university on all of our campuses, and I thank you for helping it to be so. And Madam Chair, I wish you and the entire board and your families a great holiday season and a healthy new year. With that, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler, and good luck at the Holly Dazzle Parade. And thank you for your leadership over this past year and a half. As usual, you have been extremely busy, and luckily, you are not only brilliant and thoughtful, but extremely energetic.
Thank you.
So thank you very, very much for all your work and what you do for the university. Now, I am happy to report that Regents, speaking of being busy, continue to participate in a variety of university activities. And I'll summarize just some of the notable events since we last met in mid-October. On October 26, Regent Beeson participated in the presentation of an Outstanding Achievement Award to T. Denny Sanford at Eastcliff. On November 2nd, Regent Simmons spoke at the ceremonial groundbreaking event for the Gore Annex Edition and participated in the shovel ceremony. That evening, Regent Larson participated in the conferral of awards at the College of Science and Engineering's Leadership Recognition event. On November 14th, Regent Ramirez attended the annual Equity and Diversity Breakfast. On November 15th, Regent Broad attended the annual Veterans Appreciation event. On November 29th, Regent Ramirez and I attended the launch of the Generation Next Partnership, which President Kaler mentioned in his report. This is an exciting new venture that I am happy to see the university playing a role in leading. On December 3rd, Regents Allen, Beeson, and Devine attended a meeting of the Association of Governing Boards in Chicago. The meeting focused on how boards effectively respond to change. So we're glad you're paying attention to that. On December 6th, Regents Larson, Devine, McMillan, Simmons, and I attended the 50th anniversary celebration of the foundation. It was a festive evening, noting that 50 years ago, the foundation raised $60,000, and this year the two foundations combined to raise $244 million. I would like to remind everyone of the University Senate Centennial event on January 31st in Mondale Hall. This will be a conversation about governance with Regent Simmons, President Kaler, Provost Hanson, and Professor Fred Morrison. The next regular meeting of our board, the Board of Regents, is February 7th and 8th, 2013. That concludes my report. I would like to now receive and file reports. And then I'd like a motion for our consent agenda. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda? Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Been moved and seconded. Is there some discussion about the consent agenda? Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention how much I value the process of identifying regent appointees to the university foundations. It's been a highly cooperative effort working with the trusteeship committee to really identify people who can serve in such an important role on behalf of the university.
Okay, thank you. So are there any other comments? If not, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. And now we'd like the report of the student representatives to the Board of Regents. I'd like to invite Megan Mason to the presentation table, who is the Vice Chair of the student representatives to the board. Megan, we look forward to your report. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Yes, our Chair, Cody Mickle, is out in Thailand right now enjoying a warmer climate, so I'm here in his place. So Chair Cohen, members of the committee, President Kaler, thank you for inviting the student representatives to provide their perspective on topics particularly relevant to the student experience here at the University of Minnesota. We have had excellent discussions about many of the exciting changes happening across campus. However, our comments grouped around three main themes. First, the cost of attendance at the university for undergraduate students. Second, concerns unique to the graduate students. And third, student mental health. We will begin with the topic of undergraduate affordability. As a public university, incorporated for service to society at large, the University of Minnesota is guided by a consideration of community problems and changing environments, and is committed to serving the many communities of the state. However, it came to our attention during a conversation with the Financial Aid Office that the income demographics of our students are changing, and that the proportion of students attending the U from lower and middle income backgrounds is shrinking, the exact population the university was designed to educate. As you can see in Table 1 on page 144 of your docket materials, the first four income categories constitute a smaller proportion of the undergraduate student body than 10 years ago. The proportion of students from families making more than $110,000 has increased from 9 to 23%, and the proportion in the unknown category has increased from 14 to 21%. That means that now 44% of the student population is either from families that make more than $110,000 per year, or from those that do not fill out FAFSAs, presumably because they have too much family income, or they're international students. Only half of the student body, therefore, is made up from students of low and middle income backgrounds. We know that this is not in alignment with the makeup of the state household income distribution. In 2011, 75 to 85% of families in the state of Minnesota were of lower middle income. So that leaves a 20 to 30% disparity between the makeup of the student body and the makeup of the state. We examined several possible explanations for this trend, including the overall income growth in the past 10 years in the state, increasing numbers of applications, and how price factors into students' decisions to attend the U. It seems that students of higher income classes may be opting to attend the U for its affordability, and that may be correlated with the higher ACT scores and GPAs that we've been seeing, perhaps selecting out the lower and middle income students. We are also curious how non-Minnesota residents might be playing a role in this trend. The U is the best deal in the Big Ten for non-resident undergraduates, but the fourth most expensive for in-state residents. Perhaps the higher income students are coming from other states, while our own Minnesota students cannot afford in-state tuition rates. On page 146, Table 2, you can see that the tuition increase has been 61% over the past 10 years for resident undergraduates, and there's been a corresponding 19% decrease for non-resident undergraduate students. The conversation that the student representatives invite you to have focuses on the public and private good of a degree from a state institution. As Minnesota surely models, increased education is highly correlated with increased income and standards of living. Minnesota, for example, has the 11th highest average household income in the country, the 10th most educated population, and the 11th lowest poverty rates. In addition, investment in the university yields a 13-time output for the state economy. Clearly, there are strong ties between education and socioeconomic status, and institutions like the university contribute significantly to the public good and the state's economy. However, as it stands now, students' loan burden is disproportionate to the students' income post-graduation, indicating that our graduates may not be reaping the benefits of a degree from a state institution. The student representatives offer the following recommendations to the Board of Regents on the topic of undergraduate affordability. First, to continue to support the freeze on in-state undergraduate tuition because of the land grant mission of the University of Minnesota. Second, to foster greater state, federal, and private financial support for non-loan-based aid for students in lower and middle income ranges. And third, to engage in a continued dialogue about the public and private good of a student's degree from a land-grant university, particularly with the legislators. From our discussion on undergraduate education, we now move to some of the graduate student concerns. This portion of our report is in response to the graduate assistant unionization effort last year. and much of this data comes from a survey that the Graduate and Professional Student Assembly sent to its members. 1,000 responses were received, with 450 comments relevant to the topics of advising, assistantships, and progress toward degree. Student sentiments about academic advising generally fell into one of three categories. First, their advisor was excellent and there was a positive advisor-advisee relationship. Second, that their advisor was inaccessible to their student. And third, that there was unresolved conflict between students and their advisors. For the first group, the concern was that the faculty did not get compensated adequately for their advising time, particularly when taking extra time and care with their students. The second group cited difficulties in contacting their advisor, and that their advisor had little interest in maintaining a regular dialogue about the student's academic progress. And the third group felt unable to properly resolve conflicts and expressed a desire for a protocol of whom to contact about tenuous situations with their advisor. The recommendations of the student representatives with respect to graduate student advising are that advising should be considered as part of the promotion and tenure process in the way that other university community service is incorporated. Second, there should be a consistent protocol for the resolution of advisor and advisee conflicts across departments. And third, like course evaluations, a means for students to provide feedback on their advisors is warranted. As with advising, students had conflicting opinions on their experience with assistantships and corresponding benefits and workload. While students appreciated the healthcare benefits for dependents, others feared that rise in fringe benefits caused faculty to hire more undergraduate student workers rather than pay for a graduate assistantship. Students also noted that assistantships were more difficult to obtain than they had originally been portrayed, and that the positions were often reserved for particular individuals. The overall graduate assistantship compensation was not a major concern, as the university has some of the highest wages in the CIC schools. But certainly discrepancies in the hours worked and the pay per hour were prevalent across departments. The majority of students did explain that the 20-hour per work week assistantship is rare. Most students work 2 to 4 times that much, particularly when the student's research for their degree is integrated with their assistantship funding. Our recommendations with respect to assistantships are to create a transparent process for the application and hiring of graduate assistants across the university. Second, to provide a mechanism for graduate students to address the imbalance of workload and compensation in a specific Board of Regents policy for graduate assistants similar to the conflict resolution for employees policy. And third, to include the college fee in the assistantship package. Of particular concern to the graduate representatives to the Board of Regents were comments surrounding students' progress toward degree. Students have noted that there is complacency about delaying a student's progress on a degree for reasons such as the inability to contact advisors and committee members to sign forms, as well as excessive workloads associated with research and teaching assistantships. The University of Minnesota should be preparing the next generation of researchers, educators, and professionals through its graduate and professional programs. If students are unable to attain their degree in a timely manner, then their opportunities are being given to graduates of other institutions. Moreover, the desire to attend the University of Minnesota will diminish if alumni do not feel that they received a quality education and graduated within a reasonable time window. Our recommendations with respect to progress toward degree are to conduct a leaver study to determine why students have left the university during their graduate or professional education. And second, to encourage more electronic submission of paperwork to the graduate school to ease the completion of forms. The final topic of today's presentation is student mental health. Statistics presented are courtesy of Boynton Health Services, Duluth Health Services, and the Student Conflict Resolution Center. To begin with some food for thought, there are a list of statistics provided on page 150 of your docket materials. Two that I would like to highlight are that 26.8% of all students cite having unmanaged stress at any time in the semester, and that 1 in 10 students seriously considered suicide, with 0.6% attempting to do so last year. That may seem like a small percentage, but that translates to about 390 of our students annually. Access is a major barrier to students receiving adequate mental health care. There's a 4-week-long waiting list at Boynton Health Service. Triage is certainly done so that the most serious cases are seen as soon as possible, but it's always best to see students sooner rather than later. Additionally, there is a $10 assessed fee for mental health clinic visits that are not assessed during the physical health clinic visits, and that may be a barrier to those who need care. We are certainly excited about the $500,000 facility being built on the St. Paul campus, but we would still encourage a review of peer-to-peer or less resource-intensive counseling options to ease the access of care issue. Our recommendations to improve the access to mental health services for students are to decrease the waitlist with Boynton Health Service, and doing so by looking at peer-to-peer counseling approaches, one of which is the SPIL initiative at the University of Wisconsin. And second, to simply reevaluate the need for the $10 mental health fee. We also had some interesting reports on the awareness of mental health across the university. Boynton Health Services has a 5% annual increase in students seeking services on the Twin Cities campus, and counseling visits in Duluth increased 19% in the last academic year alone. Both campuses attribute the uptick in mental health visits to decreased stigma associated with seeking care for mental illness and increased knowledge of the services provided by their respective campus health services. The Provost Committee on Student Mental Health is also in an ongoing effort to enhance the awareness of mental illness across the campus and promote resources to students. However, we want to ensure that faculty and staff also feel that the university can assist them during their stressful life events. Fostering an environment that promotes mental health and wellness is critical to students' academic success and ensures that the University of Minnesota is an institution where people want to work. To that end, we recommend that the board continue to support the efforts of the Provost Committee on Student Mental Health to help spread awareness about mental illness. And second, to evaluate the health and well-being of their faculty and staff using a tool similar to the Boynton Health Student Health Survey to identify potential mental health barriers to a healthy and productive university community. The student representatives to the Board of Regents urge your thoughtful reflection of the report presented above. We request your consideration of our recommendations and look forward to working with you to address both the concerns of the university student body as well as to highlight the strengths of the university. At this time, I would also like to acknowledge the rest of the student representatives, four of whom are here with me today. James from Morris, Kevin and Kyle from the Twin Cities, and Molly from Duluth. Thank you again for your time, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you so much, Megan. First, I'm going to ask President Kaler if he would like to say a few words in response, and then I will open it up to our board if they have some questions or comments.
Great.
President Kaler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I really commend you, Megan, and your colleagues on an excellent, thoughtful, and penetrating report. And I'll just not respond point by point, but a couple of comments that I think are important to emphasize. At the undergraduate level, it's important the board knows that the admissions process to the university is need blind. So we don't make an admissions decision based on the student's financial condition, and we work hard to package financial aid for students to be able to attend the University of Minnesota. But it is clear that particularly for a group that Regent Larson refers to as core middle-class families, the burden of higher education is heavy. Clearly, control of tuition cost is central to making that burden more manageable, and you know my view on that and my strong engagement with the legislative process to put a pause in the increase of tuition rates. I think it's absolutely critical. I think the points raised here eloquently by our student colleagues couldn't be more clear. The public good of an educated population is enormous, and as the state steps away from that, the university has had to raise tuition, not to replace state aid completely by any means, but simply to provide the quality of education that the University of Minnesota is known for. And it is that balance between quality and affordability that we have to pay attention to. It's critically important that we don't simply focus on providing the cheapest possible education of marginal quality. We need to maintain what we do and do well. Our academic metrics, both at the front end with the ACT scores and the tail end with graduation rates, are improving. So the university is becoming an increasingly selective institution. It no longer is anybody's safety school. And as a result, we're the data show, moving the demographics of students who project to succeed at the university. That, I think, is a direction of keeping our academic programs at a high level, but it also does impact the ability of students who represent the core of Minnesota population to come to the university. And we're working to increase our financial aid structure, and as you know, we launched and expanded what we're calling the President's Emerging Scholars Program to put additional financial resources into freshman admitting colleges for students who have challenges that may have affected their high school ranks or test scores. We are committed to making student success a high priority at the University of Minnesota. I particularly endorse the recommendations you have on page 147 and into 8. The third one, engaged in a continued dialogue about the public and private good. Critical, and I could not agree more. On the graduate student front, we are engaged in conversations with the graduate students about how to address some of these concerns. I think some of the anecdotal information that I've heard is absolutely unacceptable, and we will not treat graduate students in the way that some of our students have apparently been treated going forward. It's just not right, and so we will fix that. And of course, the mental health access, affordability, again, comes down to our ability to fund all of the critical needs of the university at the level that they all should be funded. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. Our engagement with the state to help us is something we work on every day. So I will stop there. I'm sure the Regents will have comments, but again, Megan, an excellent, penetrating, and thoughtful report, and thank you for it.
Thank you, President Kaler. Now, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the board, Ms. Megan, thank you for your thoughtful presentation, and the other student representatives who attend our board meetings and committee meetings. One item that you mentioned, and interesting enough, the last 2 contacts that I have had with parents of university students has revolved around advisors. And I'm curious as to what kind of guidance faculty is given in matters of advising. What are the contractual obligations? Because I think it's very important in the whole educational process, certainly lectures and labs and all, but I think that one-on-one or small group advising is very important. So the fact that Ms. Mason has talked about it, has written about it, and we're hearing about it, I'm wondering if that is an issue that needs a second look, and what is the present policy? And I don't know if the president would answer that, or if the provost or someone else, but it is an issue, I think, that has risen to the level of it needs a second look.
And perhaps, Regent Johnson, we can put that on an agenda for the Education Committee and get some answers for you.
Thank you.
All right. Regent Allen.
I was going to comment on that too, as that's taken care of. Second point, real quickly, I think it was time apparently in preparation that you didn't have time to look at the inflationary effect on that table 1. I think it would be important to bring that up to date and see what the results are. Thank you. Great report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Thank you for the report. It's thoughtful, and a lot of work went into it, and you've identified very important issues. Since a lot of the work of the Board of Regents occurs in our committees, I think follow-up on some of these most critical issues with the involvement of the administration would be very good in our committees. And I thought perhaps our chair of the board could work with the committee chairs to distribute them appropriately, because we can give them, I think, the attention they deserve there.
Yes, a good suggestion, and as we said with Regent Johnson's question, I think referring that to the committee, and so we will look closely at your recommendations and suggestions and issues and see that they're addressed at our committees. And Regent Frobenius.
This comment I was going to make before Regent Simmons made her comments and your response to that, but I'm going to make it anyway, even though it's now becoming somewhat redundant, but I want to put it in a little bit of context. Well, we do get a lot of good information out of the student representative reports from time to time. This is one of the better ones in my opinion. And these reports do influence actions, but this suggestion about making sure we really do have some follow-up to this occurring in the agendas of our committee is critical. You as board chair control the agendas of these committee meetings, and I would urge you to make a point of really completing this task this year and getting us to have some time on this to explore these in just a bit further depth. and possibly come forward with some recommendations.
All right, we will see that these issues get distributed to the appropriate committees. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Megan. It was excellent. A couple of weeks ago, a few of the regents took a day trip down to Chicago with to hear an update from AGB. And after one of the sessions, I had a chance to talk to the president of DePaul and asked him about how the recession had impacted the university, and their applications are down. This is on the graduate level particularly, and he made the point that they mitigated that through bringing in about 200 students from China in their MBA program. So your comments and his, you know, as I look at the industry trends where we would have started at a needs-based, and now we're needs-blind, and now for some of the smaller liberal arts schools or schools that are really under financial pressure, going to the sort of ability to pay full retail through recruitment of international students or out-of-state students is a real pressure point that has impact on these sort of trends and numbers. So lots to think about.
All right, thank you. Thank you again for a very thoughtful report.
Thank you.
Now we're going on to the Board of Regents policy on board operations and agenda guidelines. And we discussed the proposed amendments to this Board of Regents policy at our October 14th meeting. At that time, I outlined the goals of these changes, which are to update committee portfolios, because a lot of our work gets done in these committees, clarify areas of governance oversight, and clean up language to provide greater clarification. At this time, I would like to see if there are any final comments before the board votes on adopting these proposed amendments. Is there a motion to accept this policy?
So moved.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Now, is there some discussion about the policy? Regent Frobenius.
I just want to make a comment about the process and a couple of the points in this discussion. Through this process, we have had a fair amount of debate about the authority of committee chairs versus authority of the board chair, and I think some compromising has occurred, both of which these discussions have sort of been concerned about what happens if you have the rogue board chair, or what happens if you have the rogue committee chair from time to time. And I just want to make a plea that is something that can't be covered probably in policy, that this has to be an enormously cooperative process between committee chair and the committee chairs and board chairs. This board historically has been a very board chair centric. Chair Cohen, you've made significant efforts to be consultative with the committee chairs in this process. I think that is greatly appreciated by those of us that serve in a committee chair role. The committee chair does have a feel for the better flow of their own committee and their thoughts and their processes better than the board chair does at a given point in time. And so it's a two-way street, and I just urge us to continue that consultative pattern and process regardless of what we put in actual policy words here.
Okay. Thank you, Regent Frobenius. I firmly believe that it should be very much a joint effort, and so concur with what you're saying. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all who worked on this. Perhaps it's from my military background, but it's when you look at policies, procedures, you always ask the question, what's the worst thing that can happen? And I'm going to look at this situation, what's the worst that could happen in the Board of Regents, and where we might have a conflict with the respective board chair or committee chair. Let's just use an illustration that President Kaler administration want to spend $1 million in some program or whatever, and the board chair agrees. Regent Frobenius, you are the chair presently of finance, and you do not want to spend $1 million, no matter what. My question, if this is adopted, this policy, will we spend $1 million or not spend $1 million? Yeah. See what I'm getting at, Madam Chair? Who has the final say? Do you have as a board chair, can bypass Regent Frobenius and the Finance Committee and bring it before the full board. And I've not experienced that, but let's just say that in future days, a situation like that, or it could be a policy decision, could come forward. What I'm getting at is who has the final authority under our jurisdiction?
Under this new policy, and of course, we hope that that situation would never happen, and I would encourage any future board chairs to be very collaborative. I think that's really important, but the final say does go to the board chair. And there is always a place to bring up an item, and if the majority of the regents want to discuss an item, then that's their prerogative to put it on the agenda. So it's not that the board chair can just run wild. Regent Simmons, and then Frobenius, and then Regent Allen.
I would thank you. It's such an important question, and I would comment back that there are three major controls over that situation. One is by board policy, we set limits on expenditures where they have to be approved. And they're only approved by board leadership in an emergency situation and then brought to the board for notification. So that doesn't change. The thresholds and the requirements for board approval don't change of decisions. The second point I would make is we always have the option as individual regents to use the new business section of a board meeting to introduce a topic. So if we were unable to bring it forward in another way, there's a vehicle. And third, there's certainly collaboration among like-minded people to make sure that something surfaces on the agenda of a committee or the full board.
Okay. Regent Frobenius.
I just want to maybe respond to Regent Johnson's point just a moment, and without going into great debate, because I do think we've got something that's workable here. And I too have sort of played through the what-if scenario into various situations. At the end of the day, we also are a function, we also abide by Robert's Rules of Order in this process. And there is clearly a process within that that says, you know, if a chair is abusing the authority and refusing to place an item on the agenda, that an individual can attempt to bring that forward. If not recognized, can call for a vote of a majority of that committee to bring that item back on an agenda at a subsequent meeting. So there are several escape processes. And quite frankly, there's another issue if the board chair or the committee chair is off doing all sorts of ridiculous stuff. At the end of the day, the board chair has the authority to fire a committee chair. So there's some checks and balances in this process.
Regent Allen.
In a day of such great harmony around the whole table here, it's an interesting subject to get into. I just wanted to clarify something. I think, Madam Chair, when you said the final authority is with the chair, that was regard to whether or not the item would go onto the committee agenda. Yes. I just wanted to clarify that point.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And yes, I think that the very fact that we can have this conversation speaks to the collegiality of the board and that we can talk openly about these kinds of subjects. So I think we're ready for a vote. All those in favor of this policy, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's passed. And thank you all for your thoughtfulness around this, because I do think that it's not merely mechanics, but it is important to clarify how we operate to make sure that we are really doing our oversight effectively. All right, now we are on to the state capital budget request. And President Kaler, I'll turn it over to you as Vice Presidents Fitzenreiter and Wheelock join us at the table.
Madam Chair, thank you. This capital budget request is in response to a request from Governor Dayton. And as you will see, it focuses in a large way on so-called HEAPR funding, Higher Education Asset Preservation and Replacement Fund. Those are dollars used to make the kinds of repairs that any owner of real estate in Minnesota needs to make: roofs, pipes, wires, etc. They keep our facilities in operating shape, and my wife last year coined the poetic phrase that HEAPR is cheaper than building a building again. So this investment in our infrastructure is very important. You will also see some other additions that we believe are strategic and important, and again, the focus is on ensuring student success, ensuring faculty research productivity and scholarly impact, fulfilling our statewide mission, protecting our assets and investments, and responsibly managing the university's finances. So with that, please, I'll turn over to our two vice presidents to walk us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Chair, members of the Board of Regents. We are here today to really talk about how to strategically use our physical assets to advance our mission. And certainly this group does not need any reminder about our mission, but this is really the touchstone for us as we think about the role of physical assets and the investment in our infrastructure to better advance our goals around research and discovery, teaching and learning, and outreach and public service. More specifically, the 6-year capital plan, which was presented in February to the Board of Regents and approved in March of this past year, uses these capital planning principles to guide the development of this capital plan and the 6-year plan. These specific strategic objectives identified are listed here on your page. Particularly the first 3 are about aligning capital initiatives to institutional priorities, and it also asserts the goal of stewardship by taking care of what we have. I will add that it aligns as well with the academic assessment criteria, which is reflected in the compact process, which tie to things like the centrality to the university mission, the uniqueness and comparative advantage opportunity, demand and availability of resources, efficiency and effectiveness, and development and leveraging of resources, to name a few. So there is a relationship there. Timeline, just to ground you in, where are we in this process? We have previously, the board has previously approved the 6-year capital plan through 2018. We are now presenting to you the request for the 2013 supplemental capital request. That will go into the legislative process, to the executive branch, and in the legislative process. We expect that the legislature will adjourn in May of 2013. We will be back to the Board of Regents in the spring, in the May-June timeframe, to both review and approve the updated 6-year capital plan and as well the presentation of the 2014 capital budget request. In 2013, in September of 2013, initiate and review and consideration of the 2014 capital request. That time frame allows for legislative committees and the executive branch representatives to come and view our projects and to do their site visits during the summer months. October would be the introduction of the 2014 request to the Board of Regents, and then approval in December of next year. For the specific list of project requests, you can see that we continue to emphasize HEAPR funds. We have also reintroduced certain items, and these items as a total reflect our needs for updated laboratory space. And I would add that all campuses in college identified a need for interactive classroom to achieve engaged learning. It also reflects our desire for an increased collaboration among colleges to plan and share facilities, and represents a growing interest in space utilization initiatives to consolidate space and save costs. The 2013 request, therefore, has been defined along many of those same themes. HEAPR continues to be a top priority so that we can protect our infrastructure and reduce our operational costs. And the capital budget request consists of projects that have appeared in prior requests, specifically Eddy Hall, and advances the work for major projects anticipated in our 2014 request based on our 6-year capital plan, specifically Tate Lab, the St. Paul Laboratories, and as well full funding for the Crookston campus for the Wellness Center requests. Also prioritized our funds for the research lab and active learning classroom improvements that reinvest in the existing facilities and infrastructures. These projects are integrally linked to teaching and learning as well as research activities that are central to the institution's priorities. As we take these one by one, we'll start with HEAPR. The higher education asset preservation and rehabilitation funds are an essential component of the university's stewardship of its facilities. The funds are used system-wide. They are allocated based on need, but closely track campus size as well, building inventory and population. The building systems fund projects that follow state guidelines and are used primarily to target roofs, building envelopes, interiors, electrical and mechanical systems. Utility infrastructure renewal projects will address aging campus heating and electrical distribution systems, and the funds are prioritized using the facility condition assessment, which has been previously presented to the Facilities Committee and shared with the full Board of Regents. Eddy Hall is the oldest building on the University East Bank campus and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a contributing element to the university's Old Campus Historic District. The building has significant building deficiencies, is programmatically obsolete, and is in need of major infrastructure and structural improvements, including exterior tuck pointing. This project will completely rehabilitate Eddy Hall and will be then able to provide space for the admissions program. The Freshman Welcome Center will continue to remain in Jones Hall, which will be physically conveniently in proximity to Eddy Hall as well. This will allow staff then to move out of Fraser Hall and allow for the decommissioning of Fraser by moving that staff to Williamson. The next project is to request design funding for the St. Paul campus laboratory replacement. You can see maybe vaguely on this little map here, this involves the collaboration between 3 of our colleges that have prominence at the St. Paul campus. The College of Biological Science, the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, and the College of Vet Medicine. The research would be shared space between those institutions. We are in the programmatic exploration for the design of that space right now. So this is to provide for planning funds in anticipation of a request for full funding in 2014. Tate Laboratory is a cornerstone of Northrop Mall with approximately 200,000 square feet of space. This building was constructed in 1926 and has been the home of the School of Physics ever since that time. Renovation will occur after the Physics and Nanotechnology building is completed and occupied, and will create then a new home for the School of Earth Sciences. It will provide for updated science classrooms and the non-laboratory portion of the School of Physics and Astronomy. The large lecture halls can accommodate more than 3,000 students in physics classes alone. Improvements to sight lines, the addition of new technology enhancements, and a more conducive environment for learning are all proposed to be accomplished in this project. State-of-the-art space for theoretical physicists and astronomers is anticipated and will support the college's expansion of 20 to 30 additional faculty over the next 10 years to meet anticipated student enrollment growth in these departments. The Crookston Campus Wellness Center. Crookston has advanced the addition to its wellness center as a support for student success. To ensure academic success, the Crookston campus needs to develop rec and wellness space to serve its current student population. It's a strategic investment in maintaining the campus's competitive advantage with other undergraduate institutions in the region, and will be a positive contribution to campus life in building the mind, body, and spirit. Teaching and learning behaviors conducive to healthy lifestyle, program and services that address 7 dimensions of wellness, the physical, intellectual, emotional, social, occupational, environmental, and spiritual health. The campus population has grown in the last 5 years with the addition of 2 new residence halls, and the campus population is better served when facilities can be expanded to meet all campus communities' needs. This will improve access for student use while also continuing to meet the needs of the institution's Division II student athletes as well. Research Laboratory Improvement Fund. The request here will prioritize funding for the B Research Facility in the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences and to replace the obsolete greenhouses for the College of Biological Sciences. The other funds will be available for system-wide investment, and we have learned a lot in our administration of previously appropriated funds for research lab improvements, and we expect that we can work off of that list to make the other improvements across the system. Active Learning Classroom Funds, this was another priority that was expressed across our academic planning for all parts of our institution. This will allow for improvements in classrooms so that the learning space is more flexible and can support a new pedagogy to improve student learning outcomes. Conversion of the traditional learning space to active learning classroom creates significantly improved learning outcomes, as has been demonstrated in prior research. Now I'd like to defer to Fitz to cover the financial summary.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as you can see on this particular slide, the total investment from these projects would be $196.5 million, 172.7 roughly rounded here from the state of Minnesota, and the U of M share, and you see the HEAPR money there at $125 million. That's of course because the state provides 100% of the support for those projects. The remaining projects on the list, the amount that's shown under the U of M column, reflect our 1/3 share of those projects. That $23.8 million was incorporated into a presentation made yesterday on a debt capacity update to the Finance and Operations Committee. I will tell the board that oftentimes when these projects get to the point of actually being incorporated into the capital budget, that other resources besides the institution issuing debt, even though we've incorporated it all into our debt plans, often the colleges have gift funds or collegiate resources that lower the need for the university to issue long-term debt. And with that, Madam Chair, there's a resolution. This is an action item today because we want to advance it to the governor and the legislature very quickly.
So I will entertain a motion to accept the resolution before we have discussion. All right, thanks, Regent Beeson. Thanks. It's been moved and seconded, and now open to discussion. Regent Beeson, and then Larson, and then Simmons. Did you have it? No. Okay. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, presenters. I support the resolution. It's critical that we focus on our existing plant, and so I certainly support the high percentage of dollars toward HEAPR. I was going to put Ms. Wheelock on the spot. You might as well get used to it from this group now, being the newcomer. Just like to get your preliminary assessment of the condition of our plant and our needs. I mean, there's an unending need for money, but do you have any sort of 3-month opinions about our facilities at this point, and how how are we measuring the needs and the assessment reports, and anything you want to share on that?
Madam Chair, Regent Beeson, it's a little like anyone's household budget. There's always more wants and needs than what there are resources to attend to, and so it requires some strategic thinking about what your priorities are, how those investment opportunities advance your mission, and a lot of communication and information sharing and shared decision making. I am very pleased that the institution has really been attending to this issue for a number of years about understanding what its needs are, the condition of its existing facilities, and has prioritized a request like the HEAPR funding as a key strategic opportunity for this institution. Many of the buildings that we have on the East Bank, at our Morris campus in particular, the St. Paul campus, these are older facilities. They are not flexible buildings. They do not easily accommodate changes in research protocol, safety protocol, teaching pedagogy, and so we are significantly challenged about our desire to meet the needs of both the principal investigators or the faculty and investigators that occupy those space, the students that learn in that space, but also some very practical needs about attending to energy efficiency, the security of our roofs, the efficiency of our windows, and we have a long list of projects. We do have certainly more than 125 million even of HEPR opportunities. So it would be a very welcome outcome of the 2013 legislative session if there were a significant bonding bill and that HEPR and infrastructure improvements were prioritized. It is sometimes a challenge because they are not necessarily it's not a ribbon cutting for a new, interesting new laboratory building, but those funds really do make a meaningful difference about this institution's ability to conduct its programmatic objectives and to reduce its overhead costs by having the most efficient buildings that are possible for us and keep tuition down as a result of that. So I think we have a lot of really important information that we continue to update. We understand the return on investment from those HEPR funds or those infrastructure investments, but there's always more demand for either the improvements or for new space than what we have the resources and the time and the staff to advance. So this is a very important request.
Thank you. Regent Larson.
Vice President Fitzenreiter, if I heard you correctly, the non-HEPR fund request, the multiple requests for not for HEPR are the requests we're making of the state, correct? And we have to add 1/3 to that to get the total cost?
Madam Chair, Regent Larson, if you look at the financial summary slide, the column there for the U of M, the numbers there reflect our 1/3 share of the projects. So for example, Eddie Hall is a $14.5 million investment. The state would pay $9,667,000 of that, and the university would pay $4,833,000 of that, 1/3.
Thank you.
Okay, so what you're reflecting here is the total cost. Okay, but this, we would pay 1/3 of it. I got you.
Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've had this discussion many times, as well as the legislature. HEPR has always intrigued me. This represents about, request 60% of this total request. And what I'm getting at is if there could be more detailed working documents that are presented over to the legislature about what it's going to be used for. 125 million is a good amount of cash. And folks say, well, what are you going to do with it? Fix windows or fix the parking lot, or just what are you going to do with it on what campus? Now that gets very much into the details, I understand that. But I think it would be instructive over in St. Paul to give more of a breakdown, and those folks who represent us from the university would have that information. Because as what we know happens, they begin to use that $125 million to fund other project, becomes the basket, and they take it from there and put it over here, and pretty soon you got $29 left in HEPR. Well, we don't want that. Our priority on this list is fix what we have before we invest in some new construction. So how you do that is up to the administration, but the more details you can have for campus and building specific, I think it would be helpful.
Regent Allen.
I think that's a good point, but I think also it's important to note that we do send over a pretty complete report to them after the projects are completed, and those probably represent the best presentation of how that money is to get used. On the other hand, I think it might be good to, particularly one-on-one, to get together with some of the new members of facilities committees in the legislature and explain to them that. I just wanted to make the point again that the President's wife has been apparently reading very good reports, because it is indeed cheaper with HEPR. There are many, many reports, particularly those of the APA, the Association of Physical Plant Administrators, that show that maintaining it is indeed cheaper than having to redo something all at once at the end. And So the HEPR funding is worth some good lobbying to explain why it needs to be looked at seriously and not at the last minute cut in half, as often happens in the legislature.
Thank you, President Taylor, you have a comment.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I just wanted to emphasize a point that we have, of course, no idea how big the bonding bill will be in St. Paul, and almost $200 million is a large request. We understand that, but we believe it's a justifiable statement of the need the university has for capital investment. So we do also understand that our share of whatever size bill is there will be determined by the political process.
Regent Provenius.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Build on a couple of points that have been made. And every time we have this discussion, I keep coming back to this point that you keep trying the same thing, and we're surprised by the results when they come out about the same way, and HEPR does get cut. We have, I think, two messages, though, that are absolutely critical, and we referred to that in the presentation, but the facilities condition assessment is now a well-documented process that defines in a very objective manner. You can recall the diagrams that you've shown of this campus and its condition of buildings across this, as well as the details behind that effort. That has got better and better, and I think that becomes a absolutely critical message, because my sort of assessment of watching our performance over that is we haven't lost ground, but we haven't picked up ground on some of the lower positions that we were in that facilities assessment process when we started. So we do have some gains that are really necessary to achieve to keep it up, to keep the place up. HEPR is cheaper not only because we don't have to pay a third of it, but it's also cheaper because when it is spent on existing facilities, it avoids replacement needs, total replacement needs at a future date. Secondly, I was struck by the link to the sustainability report we received in discussion in our committee. That was the first time we really kind of looked at the facilities issues as really part of our sustainability mission. And as we work with new legislators, as we have a new team of people sort of dealing with this over there, hopefully we can use those two tools more effectively to continue to keep the dollars coming into the HEPR funds rather than these other projects if we have to get cut.
Regent Larson.
I'd like to reinforce Regent Johnson's comments two ways. One is, I think it's really important to emphasize that part of what we're doing is renovating a current facility so that we can decommission another one. And we have done that quite consistently. And therefore, by decommissioning, we don't spend any more money. And in the long run, it is much more cost effective to renovate one, expand it, if you will, update it, and then decommission another facility. And second, I think to the point about HEPR is cheaper, they need to understand that that some of the spending that we've got in here is really not quite HEPR. It's an expansion so we can decommission another one. It's a little bit different than just renovation. And then the second point is we should use the example of Northrop, which virtually everybody in the legislature would be familiar with the iconic reputation of Northrop and what it ended up costing to renovate and what it would have cost if we had done it in a timely fashion and if we hadn't had all of the water damage and everything else that happened because of a lack of funding. And those sort of actions are short-term fixes and long-term disasters, because we had to spend a heck of a lot more on Northrop than if we'd done it in an orderly fashion. If that had been our own money, you know, we would have made the right decision, I believe. You You don't not paint your house or not repair the roof on your house until the damn thing starts leaking. You know, you do it to prevent that sort of stuff from happening. And they need to understand that. And I don't know what level of turnover we've got in the legislature this year, Regent Johnson. Do you? What percentage approximately?
Madam Chair, my best calculations would have something of 58 to 60 new members in the House and the Senate.
So okay. we're reaching 30, well, around 30% or something like that.
Yeah, so this is really important to educate those new members about what can happen if they don't think it all the way through. And I think our presentation has a lot to do with that, for what it's worth.
All right, Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I'm supportive of the request here, but any way we cut it, you know, we're pushing up against 200 million, and 125 of that fits into this HEPR category, which is probably understood by many legislators, but not all. I'm very much on board with the messaging that starts perhaps with we've decommissioned 500,000 square feet. I think it's something like that over the last couple of years. It's a big number. I saw it in the context of a report, and I think that is so important. And here's a conversation I had with somebody in Duluth about the Twin Cities campus. They said, why is there so many tower cranes down there on that campus? You people don't need more bricks and mortar. And the world's changing. Why are you still building? So I went out for a little walk. It's not scientific, but over half the tower cranes within 10-block radius here aren't ours. They're private builders around us building housing. And I think that gets to the same point. A lot of where we're adding, we're updating learning space to reflect how students want to learn and how professors want to teach. And we're adding new research labs for the research and discovery side of our mission. It isn't that we're building new 4-story buildings with chalkboards in the back of them and little desks in the corner. It's a very different mission, I think, that we're on here. And if we start by saying we aren't always adding new bricks and mortar here, we're actually trying to get rid of, to the points being made by my colleagues, it might be a more productive conversation. But any way you cut it, it's a big ask, and we're going to have our work cut out for us. But I do support where we're headed here.
And Regent Devine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your report. It was very thorough, and appreciate the information and the assessment and the work that went into providing the priorities for us here and the discussion we've had. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things here relative to the issues that are directly impacting the students. I think it's a wonderful step that we've made here in the issue of the active learning classroom. Certainly as technology has changed, the style of learning and teaching has changed, the upgrades that we need to do to our facilities are in great need. And I think that putting that in as a priority right now is very important and has a wonderful impact on learning, retention, and the other related experiences. The second thing was, of course, on the wellness and rec facility that we're talking about investing in. Again, it's directly related to student participation and usage. And yesterday's report, which touched on the on four-year retention and four-year graduation, these are the tools that make us more competitive and add to the student experience and improve all of those other numbers. And although it might seem small in terms of what it might impact, it certainly affects the quality of student life significantly. And then the third area that I just want to touch on is Eddie Hall. That's been on the list for years and years and years and years. And the usage of that facility really becomes a very significant front door for the university in terms of admissions. And for many students and parents, that's their first touch point. The admissions process is of the university. And to have an attractive front door gathering area, which is in part what this facility is going to be, I think it's important. And as we move into a much more competitive environment, and we're looking and competing in a different realm than what we have in the past, I think that front door piece needs to be emphasized in the cell in terms of what we're doing, legislatively. So, obviously there's many needs and there's limited resources. The power plants and the other things that we've looked at are not glamorous projects, they're necessary projects. But I make note of these three that particularly as it impacts the student experience, I think is very important, and the selling of the institution to parents and those that visit. Make note of that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just.
Yes, one quick comment, and I
Yes.
think then we'll have our vote.
Madam Chair, it's been referred to decommissioning and non-use of buildings. If you turn to page 40 in our document material, the list is there for the last 8 years. It's a helpful list to take a look at in this discussion.
Good point. All right, I think we're ready for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the motion carries, and we have a state capital budget request with a lot of ideas for how we can really move that forward. Next item on our agenda is Vice President Mulcahy's report on the status of the university research and preview of and opportunities and challenges ahead. I want to be sure to acknowledge that this will be Vice President Mulcahy's final report to the board on the status of university research. I think he's done many committees where he was giving his last report, but this may really be it. In addition to the sentiments expressed in the recognition, we will all really miss his charismatic and engaging presentation style. President Kaler, do you have anything to introduce or add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, just note that the tremendous success that Vice President Mulcahy is about to share with us has occurred in a tenaciously competitive environment in the midst of an economic downturn of historic magnitude. The playing field is such that about 1 in 10 NIH or NSF grant applications is victorious. That is a very tough set of odds, but our researchers, with the help of the Office for Research, have been winning big. We have the 8th largest ranking among great public research universities in a state that's 21st largest in population. So we do wrestle above our weight in the research arena. We'll see Vice President Mulcahy has laid a wonderful foundation, and we will build on that in the years and decades to come. So, Tim, please proceed.
Madam Chair, President Kaler, members of the board, thank you very much. I would just like to introduce my comments by saying I've shared this with my staff. The Mulcahy family tends to be tearful, and we cry when someone wins at a game of Yahtzee. Okay? So if somewhere in my remarks, you begin to wonder what's happening to the poor guy, it's because I'm so excited about this tremendous data. That's what it is. All right, let me just start by saying on December 5th, 2005, less than 1 year after being appointed, this then freshly minted Gopher Vice President for Research offered his first report to the Board of Regents describing the state of the university's research enterprise. Now, 2,566 days later, I am before you to offer my final annual research report as your Vice President. A great deal has happened in our collective 8-year journey from then to now, and tremendous progress has been made. As usual, I provide the board with a summary of the past year's research performance metrics and provide an assessment of our performance relative to our peers. However, since 2/3 of the current Board of Regents were not members of the board in 2005, and only 4 members of the executive leadership team from that period continue to serve in the current administration, I have elected to report our 2012 research data in reference to the university's situation as it was in December 2005. It is only in this context that the true accomplishments of the administration, faculty, staff, and students of this university can be fully appreciated. I know that in doing so I run the risk of appearing self-serving, but while I'm admittedly proud of my contributions to all that we have accomplished in these 8 years, my purpose today in drawing this historical comparison is to acknowledge the outstanding work of the staff and the Office of the Vice President for Research in support of the faculty and the university's research agenda. This is their legacy, and they rightly deserve the credit that might otherwise be bestowed on a retiring vice president on the occasion of his swan song. Damn Yahtzees. Somebody in the family just got one. I can just feel it. But just as importantly, this summary of progress is intended to assure the Board of Regents in this moment of leadership transition that the university's research agenda is in sound administrative hands. This excellent staff remains in place to support Vice President-designate Herman as he begins the task of taking the university to even greater heights. A VP could not serve with a better staff. So let's begin. In 2005, the university's transformative strategic plan was in its infancy, and the U and the Board of Regents had identified being, quote, one of the top 3 public research universities in the world as an aspirational goal. I will admit that I was proud to be affiliated with an institution that set ambitious goals, but questioned, if only quietly, the designation of a specific target, because in my experience it would be difficult for any research institution to document its attainment by any measure other than total research dollars, a metric that vastly underestimates the full measure of the value of a great institution of higher education, and one that, if adapted indiscriminately, could actually distort the balance among the elements of the university's tripartite missions of teaching, research, and outreach. It was therefore in December of 2005 that I reminded the board that, quote, although research expenditure data are perhaps the most recognized measures of productivity, this single measure and rankings based upon it are not necessarily reflective of the overall quality or prominence of any individual university or its programs, especially with respect to those core activities not directly related to research. This has been a common refrain in each of my past 7 annual reports, and by its inclusion today, I've maintained my promise to myself to always admonish the board to keep that in mind. Also acknowledging that any institution that had included the terms research and ranking in its aspirational goal would inevitably be measured against this metric, I proceeded to detail for the board the U's position of 2005. Research expenditures reported in 2005 totaled $549 million, up about 4% from the previous year. However, over the period 1995 to 2005, the U had slipped from 6th to 10th among public research universities in this standing. While the portfolio grew 49% over this period, the average growth of the U's comparator group was 77%. On the basis of 10-year growth, the U ranked 15th among its 16 self-selected peers and was one of only 2 of the top 100 research universities to report a decrease in expenditures in the year 2003. Upon hearing the report, Regent Bell stated, and I quote, Vice President Mulcahy, this was the most sobering report I've heard in my years as a regent, end quote. In the back of my mind, I said, mission accomplished. It was really important that we establish where we were, not where we thought we are, but where we were. So where are we 7 years later? In 2012, the university successfully competed for $749 million of grants. As you can see on this slide, our distribution is pretty typical of the way it is with regard to across the university. And it turns out that although this total of 749 is actually less than the 769 million awarded we reported last year, if you take out the ERA funding, which was a significant part of our funding portfolio in the last couple of years, the 749 actually represented a 7.4% increase over 2011 in non-ERA funding. I think that's a tremendous accomplishment, and the President has pointed it out. It's taken place in a very, very competitive environment, increasingly competitive environment. You can see here the growth in the research portfolio across the various colleges, 2012 versus 2005. And you can see for the most part, all of our colleges have done a tremendous job. Some have shown profound growth in their research portfolios. And I think an analysis of this and further monitoring this will give us an opportunity to strategically look for areas that we could help our colleagues in some of these colleges go to even greater heights, or help address challenges that they're facing internally or at the federal level. In 2011, our research expenditures totaled $872 million, which is a 7.9% over 2010. Now remember, these are the NSF standardized data, so they always lag about a year. Our growth rate among the average growth of the top 20 research universities in the last year was 6.8%. So we actually beat the average among the top 20 research, not the top research total, but the top 20. We ranked 8th among public research universities, 10th among all universities in the country. If we do a 2011 to 2005 comparison, our rank improved from 10th to 8th among public research universities. We had a 59% growth in our expenditures. An average, for the average of the top 20 universities was 45%. This actually represented the 6th largest growth rate among the top 20 universities in the country and the 4th largest growth rate among public research universities. I think a very, very significant accomplishment that this university and this Board of Regents should be rightfully proud. The other thing, I won't take a lot of time on this, but it's very important, and you've heard it referenced today in comments, acknowledging some of the work that my office have done. And that is, when I came in 2005, the university had been the subject of no less than 3 external reviews that talked to stakeholders within and outside the university and actually characterized their assessment of the university's tech commercialization program. I summarized the findings from one of those called Commercialization, a Contact Sport, which was issued 2 months before I arrived as Vice President for Research. I'm not going to list those items. I think you can read them for yourself. But you can see they basically painted a pretty bleak picture of our performance when it came to our ability to take the great innovations our faculty are responsible for to the point that they benefit quality of life or economic development. The Itasca group had a similar assessment, and their 2 findings are there at the bottom, that they felt there was an urgent need to improve commercialization of technologies and for the university to afford better strategic partnerships with corporate partners. So I'd like to summarize very briefly what's happened since. If you can see here, this is a report that was submitted by our Tech Commercialization Office to the Association of University Technology Managers. I would just call your attention to the metrics showing for 2012. You can see across those metrics that we particularly value, and I would say one being disclosures from faculty. How many times have faculty come to us with ideas? That's been a tremendous increase. We've had an increase in our non-Glaxo revenues, which is very important. We've had increased activity of sharing research materials with other institutions, which is an indirect measure of how much they value what you're doing because they want to actually use and work with you for some of this. And in a minute, we'll talk about startups. But this is a significant performance improvement that reflects the changes we made in 2005 and 2006, 2007 in the Office of Technology Commercialization. A very important metric, especially to the state and the legislature, are the number of startups that we've actually been able to generate from the university. In 2005, we had in that period we were probably in the zone of 2 to 3 a year at best. Last year we launched 12 companies. In the last 5 years we've launched 36 companies. And I'm happy to say of the 36 that were launched, 33 are still alive and progressing in their development. 2013 looks to be even a better year. So we've really turned things around, and a lot of this is due to the innovations of our Office of Technology Commercialization and our partners, such as this, the SPA, the Sponsored Project Administration, who found ways to work better with business and industry. I won't again list these innovations, but I will mention that the 3 last innovations here. The Entrepreneurial Leave Program was presented to the committee yesterday for consideration, and hopefully it will be before the board at your next meeting for approval. This gives faculty an opportunity to leave the university for a period of time to work with a venture, work with technologies coming out of the university while still retaining their university benefits, a very important advantage. Minnesota Innovation Partnership, the President's already talked to you about. And another new innovation we talked to the Finance and Operations Committee with yesterday was the Minnesota Ventures, a new initiative which would help provide early stage funding for university-based technologies. All of these are vital to fulfilling our mission. I would tell you that although we're happy to get a lot of recognition internally and locally for these efforts, we didn't want to trust that we were doing the best we could without getting some external assessment. So we had the directors from Stanford, Columbia, and Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation come in and do an external review of our programs, and you can read their assessments here. The long and short of it, I think, is a good one at the bottom. The University of Minnesota's Office of Technology Commercialization is an office at or near the top of its peer group and should be considered an exceptional success story over the past 5 years. I'd also like to go on to talk just slightly about corporate relations, which at the time were also the subject of intense interest outside of the university and also, unfortunately, intense criticism of the university. When I came in, we commissioned a study that was called the Relationship Web, or a collaboration between Minnesota companies and the University of Minnesota. And you can see on the map here, we actually worked with 30 companies across the state, small, medium, and large companies, to get their feedback. And their recommendations are listed here. We should re-examine our IP policies to make them more attractive to business and industry, focus administrative practices to foster business applications, promote more interdisciplinary research, incentivize faculty to value industry collaboration as a priority, stay abreast of the needs and of the companies in our region, and create strategic partnerships. With that feedback, we actually embraced a vision that is shown in this slide, which really says, as a university, we want to go beyond traditional engagement with strategic corporate partners and actually try to find ways in which we can have holistic engagement where it's not simply sponsorship of activities within the university, but actually strategic partnering over direction, opportunities, legislative support. And we're well on our way as a result of several of the things we've done, including opening the Office of Business Relations. It's in its first iteration. Some of you may remember it as the Academic and Corporate Relations Center. I will just tell you, we've worked very hard on business relations and outreach, and this slide is just sliding through for you our new electronic and social media strategy to reach business and industry. We have Twitter site, we have blog site, we have website, we have electronic mailings, and we get thousands of hits a month from business and industry, keeping tabs on what's going on with the university, and this has really helped us stay on their radar screen and assure them that we're interested in having them know what we're doing and how we might do it with them. In addition to that, as you heard, university is a member of the University Industry Demonstration Partnership, which really looks to figure out how universities and companies should work together more effectively, and I was happy to serve as the national president of that organization in 2009. MinIP is a new innovation that's going in this direction. There's increased staff in our offices to really directly deal with business and industry collaboration issues. The university has played a key leadership role in the ideation and run-up of the recently announced Medical Device Innovation Consortium, which includes a public-private partnership involving the university, many medical device companies, and the FDA to try to figure out how those three groups can work to advance medical devices and medical technology to practice in a much more facilitated, streamlined way. We collaborate with Life Science Alley to launch, and we're in the midst of what is known as Optimized Productivity Project, which is a Delphi project involving feedback from a very large number of our corporate partners and university insiders that will help identify new ways for the university to work more collaboratively with our corporate partners. Contributed, and the university has contributed significantly, as you heard, to the planning, promotion, and legislative creation of the Minnesota Science and Technology Authority, and I've had the honor of serving on that advisory council since we began that. Now, it's nice to have the internal recognition, local recognition, but I believe one of our university's biggest problems is our timidness about actually proclaiming when we've actually done something well. And so I've decided I was going to put this in rather than just tell you that our efforts have been recognized nationally. I thought I would quote a few things that people need to know. Early midsummer, the president was invited to participate in a conference that was hosted by the Department of Commerce, Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and the White House Business Council, which was convened in October 22nd. The letter of invitation said, we are going to invite the presidents from 5 leading universities who are working on advancing the frontier of tech commercialization and corporate relationship. The university was selected to be among that elite group. In the invitation, these quotes I noticed them. I hope others did. I found the overhaul of the Technology Transfer Office in recent years to be an excellent best practice that helps to spur effective commercialization of technology. The MinIP program is another forward-thinking practice in terms of making it easier, et cetera, et cetera. A discussion of how the University of Minnesota has revolutionized the technology transfer procedure and how the licensing strategies that have developed have helped to move a more fruitful partnership between university and appropriate industries would be especially valuable to the panel. And this was from the Director of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Senior Advisor to Secretary of Commerce. After the meeting, we also received communication from the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which says, the University of Minnesota has many groundbreaking ideas in the area of technology transfer and industry collaboration. Therefore, we would like to highlight your university in our upcoming report. I think this is something we should be proud of. This is something people need to hear. This is not President Kaler or Vice President Mulcahy or Chair President Cohn saying we're doing a great job. This is objective assessment that what we're doing is having an impact. We've done a number of things also with regard to regulatory reforms and advances, and I can't go through these in great detail, but I can tell you this. We've taken training extremely seriously as a way to be sure that we can handle our regulatory obligations appropriately with as minimum burden as possible. Our sponsored project administration has hosted 5 annual symposia for grants administrators. It sells out in an hour, and we have over 450 attendees at each one of these symposia to date. SPA also has developed a Spectrum program which provides basic and then advanced training for grants administrators with an opportunity for certification at the end. This is a nation-leading development. I would be happy to report to this board, some of you will recall why this is important. We were recently notified in November of a successful back-to-back full ALAC accreditation of our animal care and use program for the first time in 15 years. I would also point out that we have been without a finding by USDA inspectors of any deficiencies in our animal care and use program for the past 3.5 years. And I would also say, by the way, USDA inspections are unannounced and unscheduled. So I think we've done a tremendous job. Our human subjects protection program was one of the first in the country to be issued a 5-year accreditation based on our long-term standing of excellence. And that's another tremendous acknowledgement to the staff. We've developed staff incentives for our staff in the office, for those seeking professional certifications in their field of specialty. We've led campus-wide risk recalibration initiative, and actually our office piloted a process for doing that. And recently we launched eProtocol, an integrated electronic submission and compliance tool for faculty and staff. Now, the last thing I want to share with you, and it's very important to me because I think this is more of a personal retrospective on this job, and I think it's very important. As the outgoing Vice President for Research, I leave that with you as a way to help the incoming Vice President for Research. When I first arrived here, the Vice President for Research role was an important role, but I would say it was really relegated to a senior management, grants management, compliance management position. I regret to say that it really did not contribute significantly, in my opinion at least, to the strategic development of research strategies and programs at the university. I'm proud to say that with great faculty support, the role of the Vice President for Research now is, in fact, one of strategic leadership. And it's one that I would implore this board, and I know I don't need to ask the President to do this because he views it the same way, but I would implore this board not to let this very important position drift into irrelevance, but to be sure that it is always a strategic leadership position for the university, one that you should hold fully accountable, but one that you need to support in the way that I've been happy to receive your support in the last few years. I'm not going to go through this list for you, but because of our position, this new university-wide position of leadership for research, we've been able to help the coordinate campuses, or our sister campuses, as I prefer to refer to them, in ways that we couldn't have in the past. We've been able to work more effectively with the AHC and the medical school in our clinical arenas in ways that would have been very difficult to do in the past. We've actually benefited the arts and humanities with significant investments in programs for arts and humanities that we would not have been able to do before. So my plea is keep this role a strategic role, one that can really contribute to the university. And why is that important? Very quickly, this is what's happening. Regent Cohen mentioned change is a good thing. I can just say, I would just say change is inevitable. I'm not sure if it's always good or not, but there's big change coming. These are emerging research issues on the landscape that are going to be extremely difficult to manage going forward. And what I think you need is a vice president who's in a position to work with the senior leadership in a very strategic way to address these challenges. I'm one who believes the glass is always half full, so although these are challenges, and you've heard us talk about these on many occasions, so I won't elaborate, I see them as strategic opportunities to forge new university corporate partnerships, ways and motivations to form Midwest Research University Consortia, ways to align initiatives in the university with statewide priorities. And I would say MnDRIVE is a tremendous example of this. And finally, the need to really do strategic planning for research. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some quotes. I'm not going to read them. Some of them I think I'd be able to, some of them I wouldn't. So, but the first I can read, and that is from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And again, with regard to change, open your arms to change, but don't let go of your values. Your values are your compass. The next is my hope for you. Live long and prosper. And if one quote from Mr. Spock is good, 2 quotes is even better. And this one I'll let you read for yourself. And at that point, I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Tim, so much for that report, not only for the accomplishments, but of course for the great heart that went into it. And I think that your last quote speaks to something that you have mentioned so frequently, which is about the emphasis on building relationships. So thank you very much, and I know there are comments and questions. Regent Allen and then Regent Simmons.
Tim, I just want to say when we see continued progress based on this foundational work, we will think of your good mind. When we play Yahtzee, we will think of your warm heart.
Thank you, Regent Allen.
I think somebody in my family may have just won Yahtzee, too. I actually have, before I give you some congratulations, I have 2 questions. One's little and one's big. The little one, on the slide on technology commercialization, I'd like to understand how our gross revenues, what accounts for our gross revenues going up from 2011 to 2012 without the Glaxo revenues in there. What is that difference? All
right, so is this the slide?
Yeah.
So you're saying what, the 10.1 to 10.7?
The 10.1 going to 45.7. What accounts for that?
Oh, okay. Well, the gross revenue includes Glaxo.
Yeah.
So that's all of it. And the reason in 2011, the real anomaly is the drop from 2010 to 2011. And I can tell you what that was it turned out that an audit of the Glaxo revenue stream revealed that Glaxo had overpaid the university over the previous years significantly. We noticed that, we reported it to them, and the licensing agreement with Glaxo stipulated in the case of an overpayment, they would just withhold royalty until it zeroed up. So in 2011, we really got no Glaxo income. We had been really prepaid Glaxo income.
Oh, thanks. So it was all Glaxo effect. Yeah. And then my larger question is to ask you once again to look into the future. You did in 2005 and took us on a wonderful trajectory. As we look into the future, we're under great threat from cuts to research funding from the federal government, and particularly if we go into sequestration, that's going to happen quickly. What do you see ahead for the university in terms of how will we experience that, and how do we respond?
That's a great question, Chair Cohen, Regent Simmons. Let me just try to very quickly give you my personal assessment. I do not believe, regardless of what well, I shouldn't say that. I do not believe in the face of the national research landscape that the growth rate that we've experienced over the last 5 to 6 years is sustainable. I think we've really driven this university. The faculty have worked remarkably hard to get to where we are, and I'm not sure how much more we can get from the existing structure in the face of declining research support. But what I think we can do, and we are trying to do, is find alternative opportunities to fund our innovative research. One piece of that is with our business and industry effort. Others would be finding ways to commit institutional support to research. Our peer institutions are struggling with the same challenges. I would say our infrastructure is, I think, our Achilles heel. In terms of, we really haven't had a very robust program for investment, and we've had wonderful capital building, but we haven't had a good chance to invest in existing infrastructure. So I think the university is going to continue to be among the elite universities in the country. I think all universities are asymptotically reaching their maximum given the current environment. So I think we'll have to work hard to maintain our position and even harder to improve it.
Thank you. I wanted you to say that because I think we have to be realistic as a board as to our expectations. And I'd just like to conclude my little time. You're always humble, and you acknowledge, and I want to as well, the research faculty and the technology transfer and commercialization experts and the corporate relations people. You've led an extraordinary team to success. And I can't thank you enough and tell you how much I admire you for your leadership.
Thank you, Chair Simmons. I mean, Regent Simmons.
And
Chair
any
Cohen.
other
You were chair once.
I was once. Right. Once is enough.
Well, I echo what Regent Simmons just said and what the board, I know, feels, and we appreciate so much all you have done for the university. Thank you very much, and wonderful new life.
Live long and prosper.
That's right. Sounds good to me. All right, and moving on, we now are looking forward to hearing from Senior Vice President Jones. Please come to the table along with Chancellors Black and Lemkool and Diana Harvey. And today we are going to be updated on new brand campaigns for the university campuses in Duluth and Rochester. And again, we're having all these final reports. So this will be Robert Jones' final report to the board. And he's always brought wonderful reports. We look forward to that. President Kaler, do you have anything that you want to introduce?
I think this will be a very, very interesting set of opportunities for us, so I'm ready to see it. Vice President Jones.
Chair Cohen, President Kaler, members of the board, Vice President McKay is always a very difficult act to follow, but I promise you I'm not going to cry. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present to the board today. We're very excited to showcase to you some recent work that we've been doing to build the University of Minnesota's Driven to Discover brand across the entire university system. One of the lasting legacies that I hope to leave from my time here is to ensure sustained thinking and how we talk about the University of Minnesota as a multi-campus university system, while we advance the function and the work of the university system at the same time working effectively to leverage our limited resources. We've been able to bring the notion to life in a recent branding exercise with the campuses in Duluth and Crookston through understanding their unique audiences and highlighting each of their campuses' distinctive strengths. We've been able to strengthen the University of Minnesota umbrella brand Driven to Discover. a brand that I think has served the university extremely well over the last 8 to 10 years since its inception. As a component of the President Kaler's operational excellence work, our Department of University Relations, under the leadership of Chief Communication Officer Diana Harvey, made central resources available to all of our campuses across the state to develop their own marketing campaigns that will help them establish their unique identities while systematically connecting to Driven to Discover. The chancellors at Duluth and Rochester were the first to seize this opportunity, and Diana and her staff are looking forward to working with our colleagues in Crookston and Morris in the months ahead as well. Diana will describe the process that she and her colleagues from the University of Relations in Olson, the university agency of record, undertook to arrive at the identity and capture the essence of each of the two campuses, in which they can use this identity to effectively build their own identities within the broader branding and structure of Driven to Discover.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And thank you, Chair Cohen and board members for the opportunity to share our work. The discovery process that we used on each of our campuses was deep, extensive, and ultimately revealing and fascinating. The process included interviews with key stakeholders, including campus leadership, faculty, staff, students, alumni, community leaders and colleagues, and staff. Our agency, Olson, has a PhD anthropologist on staff, and she led us through student ethnographies at UMD, in which student attitudes and opinions were gauged through shadowing them over a course of several days, interacting with them and their friends and families, and working to understand what led them to choose the University of Minnesota, and what about their experience here is distinct and important to them. Our findings on both campuses were unique in many ways, but similar in some key aspects. At both UMD and UMR, any resulting identity campaign must communicate the following elements: a special sense of place, a strong sense of community, and a distinct academic experience. All of this research led us to what we term a shared belief about the campus from which our creative executions stem. I'll turn the presentation over to Chancellors Black and Lemkuhl now to share the best part, how they will position their campuses going forward, and how the creative concepts will be brought to life in their communities while leveraging the equity that has been built and Driven to Discover over the last several years. You will see how they apply their new identities for the purposes of student recruitment, alumni engagement, reputation enhancement, and philanthropic development. Chancellor Black.
Thank you, Diana, Regent Cohen, members of the board, President Kaler. It's a pleasure for me to be able to speak with you for a few minutes this morning, and certainly an honor for me to make this presentation with my colleague Robert to my left. He's been an incredible champion for us and has really strengthened our sense of a system here at the University of Minnesota. Approximately a year ago, I put together a UMD brand identity task force. The purpose of that task force was to work with our Office of University Relations, to work with the Olson Agency, and to work with a wide range of community members, of faculty, staff, and students to have a stronger and clearer voice and brand for UMD within the overall university brand of Driven to Discover. This slide indicates the process that we went through. Also gives you a sense of some of the people we dealt with. Mayor Don Ness, Senator Tom Bach, Lieutenant Governor Yvonne Pretner-Solon were part of this process. Also on our task force, it was made up primarily of faculty, staff, and students, but we also had key professionals in communication, public relations, and external relations. Those included people like John Hyduke, who's the president of Westmoreland Flint, Amy Rutledge from Minnesota Power, and Christy Schmidt from the Essential Healthcare System. So it was quite an incredible group. We based this work upon the strategic plan that we had developed my first year at UMD. The strategic plan created a sense of vision, mission, goals, and core values, and it was important to me that this branding and identity process build upon the identity and strengths of that strategic plan. As has already been indicated, part of our purpose was to help differentiate UMD from other University of Minnesota campuses, differentiate ourselves from other mid-sized competitors. I think too often we talk about what we're not. We're not the Twin Cities, we're not MnSCU, we're not North Dakota State, but we haven't talked enough about what we are and what is the essence and richness of what we are. So that was a key point. We also felt it was critical that whatever we developed fit well within the system's overall brand strategy. So here is the mantra that Olson wrote and developed after all the research, after all the discussions, after the great work of the task force. There is a feeling here. It is found in our proud, dogged spirit. It's in our passion for solving real-world problems. It's found in our inherent curiosity to learn in any and every way possible. It's rooted in the grounds of a city that's retained a small-town feeling. It's in our work hard, play hard ethos that we wholeheartedly embrace. It's in our tireless commitment to preserving and protecting the land and water that surround us. On the edge of the wilderness, it's a choice we've made to come here. A choice that holds merit, that stands for character, determination, and belonging. There is a feeling here, and when you come to UMD, you feel it too. So within this mantra, you get a sense of our character, of who we are, of what our students are interested in, of the research and incredible teaching that goes on at UMD. And from this mantra, we developed what's called a shared belief statement, which you can see there in front of you. Now, this shared belief statement is intended to capture the essence of the UMD brand. It's not a headline, but it's a belief that stands behind the brand itself. So from this process, Olson developed a creative concept. And that creative concept is labeled Those Who Can, Duluth. Those who can learn by doing. Those who can respect those who came before. Those who can seek knowledge from their elders. Those who can find lessons in the trees. Those who can see possibilities and problems. Those who can turn dreams into bridges. Those who can embrace the elements. Those who can dig deep for answers. Those who can get their hands dirty. Those who can give back. Those who can Duluth. So this is the essence of the creative expression of our new brand identity. On the next slide, you will see examples of how we bring this campaign to life. And much of it will be brought to life by doing things by hand. For instance, students printing screen print t-shirts, students creating posters by hand, building a billboard by hand. Things that capture sort of the can-do spirit of UMD and capture the fact that much of our teaching and research involves practical application and involves students working closely with faculty and with staff. Next, we have an example of a print ad that uses real-life stories to bring this concept to life. Now, this one emphasizes one of our civil engineering students, and the statement that it makes is that some can't imagine nature influencing the design of the most unnatural constructions of all. Those who can, Duluth. Now, as we turn these concepts into radio ads, the typical phrasing would be, those who can, Duluth, the University of Minnesota Duluth, driven to discover. So all these ads will tie in not only UMD, but the overall university brand. The next slide gives an example of a spread ad or brochure. This one emphasizes research we're doing in water resources and on the lake. And the next slide gives you an example of a billboard that we're intending to create, which will be handcrafted. So instead of using the typical plastic shrink wrap that goes over a billboard these days, what we're thinking of doing is actually creating a billboard using metal that carves out the UMD lockup and new brand and allowing it to rust over time, which will capture a wonderful maroon color. and also reflect many of the buildings on the Duluth campus, which have natural steel on the exterior, which weathers over time and gives a sense of who we are. And the final slide gives you a sense of a possible landing page for our website. This one emphasizes research on climate change and using seeds and technologies to study climate change as one more example of ways we will use this brand. So that's my message to you today. After this meeting, you'll be given examples of our new swag. We have bags for each of you and also a travel mug that has the Those Who Can Duluth logo. So thank you very much.
We worked with Olson in a similar way as UMD in developing a creative platform for the University of Minnesota Rochester. So after talking with students, faculty, staff, and community members, Olson team also developed a mantra to capture our culture. And I knew I was in trouble when I'm competing with a chancellor whose background is in theater, but here goes. We are here for a reason. And from the moment we enter the building to the paths we travel beyond its walls, we prove it. We are unique. Here we believe that philosophy is a way to study science, as is literature, ethics, and ballroom dance. Here we learn how the brain learns best and then apply that knowledge in practice. We are here persevering in a highly rigorous academic environment, taking on the challenges of a profession in an ever-changing field. Defined by our outcomes and not by our struggles, we are a community that wholeheartedly invested in its success. Here at UMR, we aren't just a health sciences school, we are a human one. Resourceful, compassionate, adaptable, and truly unique. Building on these cultural assets, we worked with Olson to develop a creative platform that was bold, that would push us as an organization, one that was active, dynamic, and engaging as is our approach to learning, something that was cutting edge and forward-thinking and always reminds us to be innovative, and differentiates UMR from other institutions, and connects our focus in the health sciences with our focus on reinventing learning. Next slide. Olson developed two creative concepts. The one that best conformed to our guidelines is recoding the DNA of learning. What you see on this slide is a person looking at a wall hanging using this creative concept. Recoding the DNA of learning is a concept that is bold and will continue to remind us about our institutional mission. It is a concept that enables us to create very active, engaging, and dynamic ways to talk about UMR. Given the research on the human genome and the emerging and exciting developments in the area of individualized medicine, a concept associated with one's DNA creates an ambiance or a backdrop of cutting edge, innovative, working at the core or essence and not just with symptoms or at the margins, all attributes we strive to express and live at UMR. The concept differentiates UMR from many other institutions. Not many institutions could, and more importantly, be willing to make this claim. I'm particularly excited about how this creative platform, because it connects two core themes about UMR. Our focus on preparing undergraduates for careers in the health sciences, and our focus on reinventing learning in higher education. The expression recoding the DNA will connect with our prospective students who are interested in health sciences. And the expression recoding the DNA of learning implies that UMR is reinventing the essence or core of the learning experience. Hence, the concept captures the confluence of these two themes. The next couple of slides shows examples how UMR could use this creative platform in marketing materials. So for example, here's a print ad that uses a DNA fingerprint in the background to describe UMR. The statement reads, "This is Jenny Colby, an incoming freshman. This strange pattern is Jenny's DNA. Why use DNA to advertise the university? Because we do things differently at the University of Minnesota Rochester. We integrate subject matter across courses and use the liberal arts to teach science. At UMR, we are recoding the DNA of learning to create the most future-ready health science graduates." Here, the next slide is an example of an admission brochure The graphics are not flat, but three-dimensional, dynamic, and engaging for a student interested in the health sciences. Next slide is an example of a display in a mall, and I guess we're always going to be associated with a shopping mall. What I like about this visual way to express learning using a DNA structure is that the core of essence of learning is not the individual elements, a book on Spanish, mathematics, or pharmacy, but how they are stacked together. The next slide shows the creative connection between DNA and learning using double helix mobiles. Again, this captures the connectivity of the learning. Imagine that the elements of the double helix could be courses as shown here, but also could be learning or development outcomes, or community engagement things, whatever. Again, all these mobiles convey that learning is more than the individual experience, but the core of, or the DNA of learning is the connectivity or the linkage of those experiences. Next slide shows some examples of DNA fingerprints. Another display again in a shopping mall. But even the computer skin that we could put on our students' computers. The DNA fingerprints interweave individuality and complexity, which underscores the emerging practices in learning of mass individualization in the use of learning analytics. And finally, here's an example of a web presence. Imagine the DNA strand rotating, moving on the screen, an active, dynamic, three-dimensional image. Last slide. As I socialize this creative concept with students, faculty, and staff, and other external stakeholders, I ask them to think of other ways that they could imagine using the concept to talk about UMR. They mentioned personalized DNA art, double helix pens, coffee cups with double helix handles, double helix bookshelves, walls painted with DNA fingerprint patterns, videos that implode, explode with rotating double helix patterns connecting different elements of learning experiences, and so on. My point in mentioning their suggestions is not that we will do all of them. We will soon launch the next steps in the process to develop some marketing elements. But I mention their ideas here just to demonstrate that this creative concept, recoding the DNA of learning, provides a rich conceptual platform to talk about UMR, its programs, its partnerships, its pedagogy, in a multitude of ways, yet connect with its core, its essence, its DNA. So now, for my last time, it is with great sadness that I turn this back over to my boss, Robert Jones.
Thank you very much, Chair Cohen, members of the board. I think this concludes our presentation, and we'll be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Well, Chancellors and Robert Jones, thank you so much for the report, and Chancellor Lemko will wait for the production of all these elements with the double helix, and Chancellor Black, we're looking forward to picking up our items with already with your new logo. So thank you very much for the presentations, and are there some questions or comments? Regent McMillan and then Regent Houston.
Thank you, Chair Cullen, and I want to commend the leadership here at the university for working together to come up with this solution and this outcome that I think is really, really good. There's a natural tension between, you know, an organization like UMD that's proud of where it is and the community in which it exists, that can work against a need to centralize and brand at one point. And I think that, and I get that feedback from community stakeholders. Chancellor Black referenced a couple of them. This is an outstanding example of bringing all that together and working within and without the university to come up with I think a kind of a double branding solution here that really makes a lot of sense in the case of UMDs, and I like UMRs as well. So kudos on the process here of working this out.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Regent McMillan that there's always natural tension between the main headquarters and other units. And I understand the need for individual branding messages and images. I'm a little concerned about on the Duluth side not seeing the Block M logo, and maybe it's sort of gone away. And I don't want to critique that because I think there's a lot of merit in the campaign, but our consultants sort of overseeing all this, right? So that, I mean, there's a science to this where it all has to hang together, and how would they answer the question of why we shouldn't see the Block M with the Duluth ads? Ms. Harvey, maybe you could answer that, or?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The Regents policy on branding actually is quite flexible about the use of the Block M, but it does require that all University of Minnesota websites have the Block M. So on the UMD website, you'll see it there. And we, you know, in the creative executions, we may use it in some instances and may choose not to use it in others, depending on the audience, how widely and regionally we're marketing, you know, using the tactic and so on.
The follow-up, Madam Chair. So is that something we're managing down here when it's used and when it's not used?
Regent Beeson, we're working in consultation with our partners at UMD.
Regent Larson.
I think that was very observant, Regent Beeson, and I would strongly encourage you to consistently use the Block M. I've had a lot of experience with branding myself, and my former company was a disaster because it wasn't in, they didn't do things in common all over the world. And it took us about 10 years once we determined that things were all screwed up to finally get it straightened out. So don't screw it up. That's number one. Number two, historically as a university, and I don't quite understand this, but historically we've had trouble with our color. The maroon isn't always maroon. Sometimes it's kind of purplish. Be very, very cognizant of that also. And then I make a comment. I like your messaging. I like your ideas. You know, it seems to present you as, both of you, as quite innovative, or both of your organizations as quite innovative, and that is encouraging. But always remember the core fundamentals of branding: consistency, always. And your color and your logo are critically important. And I would strongly encourage you to make sure that those are always there, right on.
Couldn't agree more, Regent Larson. Thank you for those comments. And that's why we, my predecessors took pains to establish a Regents level policy on branding, and we continue to adhere to it.
Thank you all very, very much. We appreciate it. We're really interested in these new efforts to differentiate as well as promote the university as a whole. Thank you for your efforts, and Senior Vice President Jones, all the best to you. All right, and now we're moving on to, as I see, Vice President Fitzenreiter's already at the table, and Associate Vice President Volna, as we talk about the annual financial report. President Kaler, anything? No, we're just gonna, you're on, the two of you.
Chair Cohen, members of the board, thank you very much. While Vice President Fitzenreiter is pulling up the presentation, I'll just give you a little bit of background. The annual financial report represents a report on our audited financial statements every year. The purpose of the audited financial statements is slightly different in some respects from the reports that you sometimes see in other committees and here at the board, in that it is a presentation of the institution's financial activities, balances, and results of operations in conformance with generally accepted accounting principles, which at times is different than the presentation vehicles and mechanisms you see for other reports that you may consider and act on. That came up a little bit yesterday at Finance and Operations, and we had a nice discussion about the differences between how things might be presented one way or another. For 2012, the highlights on the annual report, in summary, the university's finances continue to be strong and prudently managed. Our net assets on the statement of net assets increased by $124.7 million. Total revenues decreased slightly while expenses were up slightly. Our cash flow for 2012 was negative $63.5 million, which was about $92 million less cash flow than 2011, and I will talk about that a little bit later. And the auditors, Deloitte & Touche, did issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements with no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls. The statement of net assets, or the balance sheet as some of you may refer to it, it has two really primary components, the assets and the liabilities. Total assets for the university in 2012 increased by about 4.5%, or $228 million. The major segments of the balance sheet include cash and equivalents and investments, along with a couple other minor areas of activity or balances. Cash and cash equivalents did go down in 2012 by $62 million. The primary driver of that was that cash held in money market accounts and cash equivalents was shifted into agency securities and other types of investments which do yield a slightly higher rate of return, and so as a result the cash balances went down while investment balances went up. Also, capital assets, which represents property, plant, equipment, and so forth, increased over the year by $92 million, primarily because of construction activities in certain areas like the Biomedical Discovery District, the Northrop renovation, and the University Rec Center. On the liabilities side of the balance sheet for 2012, total liabilities increased by about $104 million, which was about a 6% increase. The accrued liabilities, which represents accruals for compensation, severance, and so forth, went up by about $20 million, primarily because of changes in the other post-employment benefit accruals that we calculate and record every year. Long-term debt, which is the biggest part of the liabilities section, went up $81 million, and that is because of some of the debt activity that you as a board have seen and have approved over the last year or so related to construction activities and financing therein. The second major statement that is audited is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net assets. This slide gives you just a brief overview of the highlights of that. The total operating revenues for 2012 were up compared to 2011, as were the operating expenses. A unique aspect of higher ed accounting is what's called a net operating loss. That is shown this way because we are required to show the state and federal appropriations and the gifts as a separate part of the statement. And you will see those down below under what's called net non-operating revenues. Other revenues consist of miscellaneous activities, sales, gifts that might represent sort of unique activities and so forth. Overall, increase in net assets for the year 2012 was $124 million, as compared to $312 million for the prior year. Next slide gives you a more exploded view of the total spectrum of revenues that the university records and uses every year. We have a very diverse revenue stream. The pieces of the pie chart that are pulled out, which have blue font on them, are the operating revenues, tuition and fees, grants and contracts, sales of educational activities, and so forth. The other represent the non-operating revenues of the institution, and as you can see, that large green piece of the pie represents state appropriations, which is a significant part of the university's revenue, but due to that anomaly, it is called non-operating. On the expense side, this pie chart shows you the total elements of operating expenses for the institution, which this year were $2.95 billion. The three largest pieces, instruction, research, public service, represent the core missions. Academic support is a supporting categorization of expenditures which support the institution's academic activities. This year what we did also is include a couple bar charts to give you a sense of the relative expense activities year over year for the last 5 years. This first graph shows the operating expense trends for the last 5 years based on the functional classifications of instruction, research, and so forth. If you look at some of the major ones, instruction, research shows that trend that Vice President Mulcahy just talked about in terms of the growth. Institutional support is a function that has gotten a lot of activity in the press the last few years. It is sometimes mistakenly represented for administrative costs. That's not always the case. If you look at that line, which is sort of the lime green line partway down, you'll see that our instructional or our institutional support expenses have been on the decline for the last 2 or 3 years. The next bar chart shows operating expenses shown slightly differently. It's called the natural classification. This is how it would look if you saw it based on salaries and benefits, supplies, and so forth. There's a more detailed table that shows this on page 71 of the annual report that you did receive. The last major statement in the report that is audited is called the Statement of Cash Flows. It is intended to show the cash inflows and outflows of the institution based on the sources we receive it from and the uses that we apply it to. I've presented a summary table here with a slight modification from what you see in the annual report. I've added a subtotal under operating and non-operating, and I've done this to try and demonstrate for you that we have what I would call a positive cash flow related to the core operations of the institution when you add back gifts and state appropriations. When you look then down below at capital and related financing, which is the debt we issue and its use on buildings, and our investing activities, you can see that is where we actually have the negative cash flow for the year. I think that's an important distinction to make because I think operations cash flow being positive is a very important aspect, and this highlights that. The next slide you've seen in prior years, it's sort of a visual depiction of how money goes out and what it goes out for, and money coming in and what it comes in from. So that $63.5 million decrease you can see is from left to right. Some of the key changes for this last year are tuition and fees contributed $61.4 million more cash than in the prior year. Operating grants and contracts contributed $65.7 million more cash than in the prior year. Our outflows to employees for compensation and benefits was down by $31 million in terms of cash flow. Our state appropriations, which you would expect because it is going down, contributed $69 million less cash this year than the prior year. And because our debt issuances were less this year, we took in $186 million less cash related to debt issuances than in the prior year. And then the last thing I'll cover briefly is the component units. The university has a number of entities that are related to the university in one way or another. Those that are governed and owned, so to speak, by the institution are the ones that we blend in. Those would be Reminco and Umore Development Company. And the ones that are discretely presented represent those entities which are related to us, but which are legally separate enough or have less control by us such that we don't show them as legally part of us. Those include the foundations, the Landscape Arboretum Foundation, 4-H Foundation, UMP, the Alumni Association, and the Gateway Corporation. And in the report, we basically present their statements as they have them audited. We don't own the results or the activities there, so we just present it for your information. The last slide shows just a brief summary of those balances and activities from those entities. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from board members? All right, everybody seems, I know this was talked about in the Finance Committee yesterday also. All right, well, thank you both very, very much. All right, we're now on to our committee report, so I will call on faculty, staff, and student affairs. Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I'm pleased to report from the committee to the full board. The Board of Regents Policy, Employee Development, Education, and Training came before the Committee for Action. We unanimously recommend approval of the proposed changes to the policy. The changes add a new type of faculty leave called an entrepreneurial leave, intended to encourage faculty to engage in activities that enhance the commercialization of university-based technologies and to invigorate the formation of new spin-off companies based on university research. I move adoption of the revised policy.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
The committee also unanimously recommends approval of the revised consent report. It contains some very important appointments. That of Dr. Brian Herman as Vice President for Research, appointment of Catrice Albert as Vice President for Equity and Diversity, and conferral of tenure for Crookston Chancellor Fred Wood. I move adoption of the revised consent report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then we had a robust set of discussions on non-action items. We reviewed amendments to the Board of Regents policy on awards, honors, and recognition, and that will come forward for action in the future. We engaged in a discussion with administration and amongst the committee on the university's compensation philosophy and planning in the context of the board principles on compensation. We received an update regarding the annual report on faculty and staff salaries and provided input to staff on the report's timing and parameters, including encouraging looking at total compensation as opposed to just salary. And finally, we received and discussed an important update on implementation of the university's equity and diversity vision framework. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Now the report of the Finance and Operations Committee, Regent Hung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under action items, we discussed a Board of Regents policy on debt transactions. The committee unanimously recommends adoption of amendments to the Board of Regents policy debt transactions, which are being presented to update the policy and clarify existing practice. I move its approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
We also had a consent report item. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes the purchase of goods and services over $1 million. I move its approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. We also had a number of non-action items. The committee discussed and received information on the University of Minnesota Startup Generation and Job Creation Strategy, which described the potential allocation of monies from the Accountability Fund included in the request to the state of Minnesota by the university for the 2014 to 15 biennium. We'd like to add that this is an exciting work in development, which will result in the creation of a small angel investment fund for University of Minnesota startup companies and an affiliation with a larger venture fund for follow-up financing. We also had a report on the annual financial report, the annual debt capacity forecast, and we also received information on the quarterly investment advisory committee update, the quarterly asset management report, the quarterly purchasing report, the debt management advisory committee update, and the emergency approval with information on the hiring of a debt advisor and information on the University of Minnesota Rochester housing refinancing. That concludes my report.
Sounds as though the committee covered a lot. Report of the Audit Committee, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. We have a consent report item. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report to review engagement with an external audit firm that exceeds $25,000 as required by the Board of Regents Policy Audit Committee Charter. I move its approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. And then on non-action items, the committee discussed and received information on the external auditor report, as well as the introduction to the development of an institutional risk profile, which was created in 2005 and last updated in 2009. The committee also received a presentation on the risk profile of the research enterprise by Dr. Mulcahy, and a report from the compliance officer, including the semi-annual controllers, as well as a report from the controller, semi-annual report. And finally, a report of engagements with auditing firms was received.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Now, Educational Planning and Policy Committee, Regent Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Under action items, we have a consent report. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes new, changed, and discontinued academic programs. I move its approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The committee also reviewed proposed changes to the Board of Regents policy on activities involving recombinant DNA or other potentially hazardous biological agents. We reviewed proposed changes to the Board of Regents policy on animal care and use. We received an update about the university's undergraduate education goals for the future, learned about the university's undergraduate enrollment trends, and discussed tuition philosophy. Madam Chair, that ends my report.
Thank you. And now the report of the Facilities Committee, Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Facilities Committee, one action item. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of schematic plans for Amundsen Hall Gore Annex addition and infrastructure upgrades in the Twin City campus. I move its approval.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Madam Chair, three non-action items. The committee discussed and received information on first amendments to the Board of Regents policy of alcoholic beverages on campus. Secondly, a report on sustainability and energy efficiency policy and university sustainability goals, which describes efforts of the university community to support and encourage sustainable practices and activities. And finally, information on planned sale of 18+ acres and 51+ acres in Carver County Landscape Arboretum, exercising renewal options to continue a lease at 111 South Broadway, Rochester, at the Rochester campus in the Capital Planning and Project Management Semi-Annual Report. Madam Chair, that concludes the Facilities Committee report.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. And the Litigation Committee did not meet this month. All right. Is there any old business to come before the board? Is there? There's one item of new business that I would like to bring before the board, and that is a resolution supporting the merger of the two foundations, the Minnesota Medical Foundation and the University of Minnesota Foundation. And it's a resolution offering the board support. I'd like a motion first. For a motion, Regent Simmons.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move approval of this resolution because I think it's appropriate and important that this board acknowledge this great opportunity that's been identified. It's really an extraordinary intent to merge two very important entities in the life of this university. And these things don't come easy because they're both successful. They both have people on boards. They both have executives and management team and employees. So I think it's extraordinary. And most of all, they both have donors who are passionate about the university. This intent to merge the two foundations has come, I believe, with very great consultation, including with Regents, about the appropriateness and the desirability of going forward. I think that it is just so important that we make a statement of support for this intent and also prepare ourselves for how we, as a Board of Regents, will engage. We will be engaged. Two of us are on the executive committee of the University of Minnesota Foundation and have the opportunity to work with our colleagues on that board on behalf of our fellow regents. And I think also there will eventually be documents that need to come to this board for our consideration and approval. And to help us prepare for that, I would encourage us to follow the process, to have input into it through our representatives on the foundation boards, and also consider getting external consultation for us so that we are prepared to help make the kind of decisions that will contribute to the success of a unified foundation. So that concludes my statement that is in fact an enthusiastic motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, and is there a second to that motion? Second. It's been seconded. And is there any further discussion about the motion that's on the table? And we certainly will take as part of that discussion, there was to consider some outside counsel in order to help us just support their merger and to be sure that we're doing our oversight. We will certainly take that into consideration. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, the motion carries, and we applaud the two foundations for taking on this Herculean task of trying to join the two foundations. Is there any other item of new business? If not, I think I will call for a motion for adjournment. Do I hear one?
So moved.
So moved. And is there a second? There's been a second. It's been moved and seconded. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.